And I've written 3 of the 5 volumes of a Torah commentary called the Rational Bible, including Exodus, which interestingly was the first one that I did, given that it has my favorite document in history, the 10 Commandments. And as I say on my American talk show, if you want to defund the police, there is actually a way. Have everyone live by the 10 Commandments. Then you can defund the police. So that is where I come from in this discussion. And I trust you will all defer appropriately to a member of the chosen people.
Happy to.
I want to pick up on what you said, Dennis, a little before, and I want to propose that there might be a very important narrative reason why the midwives are Hebrew in this case. And the reason, I think it's a good lesson for us today, which is that the tyrant is empowering women to kill their men. That is what the tyrant is doing. Mm-hmm. And he's doing it in order to feminize the Hebrews. And I think that
no wonder you get in trouble all the time.
But I think
my mentor Peter Berger has a notion: signals of transcendence. Mm-hmm. Some are positive, beauty, or C.S. Lewis surprised by joy. Mm-hmm. Some are negative, like the Auden one. This, to me, is the ultimate signal of transcendence ever. Because if you look at burning, mm-hmm. it must end in ashes.
Mm-hmm. And you can't look away from fire either. Like we
Nothing
are the
lasts.
apes who couldn't look away
changes.
from fire.
You can't step in the same river twice. Mm-hmm. If you just go that way, you'd end up with a Hindu view of Maya, mm-hmm. and the world's unreal. Mm-hmm. And yet, no, here's something burning, but not burned up.
Right, that's us, man. That's
well,
us.
No, there's something beyond us, mm-hmm. and he's arrested. He sees it, and then he seeks for the explanation, and immediately he encounters the Lord. And that's why, Dennis, the Jews themselves are the ultimate, because of your survival. Despite persecution, you shouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. Some shouldn't.
You know what I'm saying.
Just forgive me. I shouldn't have allowed that out. Yes.
Now you're in trouble.
I'm thinking of Trotsky and the like. I just there's some
well to jump
unimpressive Jews.
To jump from the Hebraic to the.
And he said, "Draw not nigh hither. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place where."
By the way, the only redundancy in God's entire dialogue in the Bible
is.
Take your shoes off your feet.
And so
just
why?
a cute, meaningless point, but I've always gotten a kick out of it. Where else are your shoes if not on your feet?
From off thy feet.
Yes.
Like where else?
Right. Just take off your shoes would have sufficed.
Is that in the Hebrew?
Yes. Yes. It struck me as a kid. Where else are his shoes? I don't.
Well, it also means I think that.
So. I have always asked the question why to any phenomenon since drove my parents crazy. So everybody knows Jews complain more than other groups, certainly more than Christians. So that's a given. I even have a test. Get a Christian, get a Protestant, Catholic church, and a Jewish synagogue grouped together for lunch, an ecumenical lunch, and I arrange in advance to serve overripe cantaloupe. Which group will complain the most? Everyone knows the answer. The Jews will complain the most. Okay, so that's not a riddle. The riddle is why. And I have a fun theory, which I won't bother with, and I have a serious theory. And the serious theory is Jews look at suffering with the following statement: it stinks. And Christians look at suffering as being Christ-like. And that's the difference in views of suffering, which is fine. I love the fact that we don't agree on everything because we enrich each other. But I really do believe that the view of suffering is different. The word redemption, as was just used, that God will redeem this suffering is not a concept I am theologically or emotionally comfortable with.
So first of all, will bookmark the overripe cantaloupe because I wouldn't stand for that. So that's proof of your argument here. Because I don't know what's wrong with you. Yeah, I mean, that kind of experiment is just unconscionable. So first, I want to just have that stated clearly. This was so interesting to me with the bringing in of Aaron because, like, for me as a storyteller, it's like, right, you elevate the storyteller, right? It's the messenger. But then Aaron, the minute he has a chance to do anything, like, is running off making golden calves. And it's like, so it goes back to what you're saying, that Moses...
He's not the direct recipient of the divine revelation either. He's the second
order.
He's
the second order.
But Moses doesn't work without him, and he's completely adrift without Moses. So it's very funny.
Yeah, that is exactly the structure, by the way.
Well, you wonder, too, if that's not a representation of the relationship in some sense between the genuine prophet and the politician. Because the politician is necessary and has to play this game where victory is everything and is going to be swayed in some sense by pragmatic and ideological concerns. And that's actually necessary in order to bring the prophetic into the realm of policy, right? You can't do without that. You can't just be above politics.
Yeah, you can have John the Baptist like screaming out in the desert. That doesn't make laws. Like, that's not good for laws.
Right.
Correlina.
So,
by the way, forgive me one thing.
Please.
It's a very sad fact, it seems to me. We're stuck in human life. We want leaders who don't want to be leaders.
That's true. That is so true.
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that? That we'd rather have people
who want to be leaders, 90%, not all, 90% want to be leaders because they want to be leaders.
Yeah.
Not because they want to do immense good and have no alternative in their life to do so.
So that's the narcissistic and the prideful.
Yes.
So we want someone like Moses.
Yeah, but the guy who's like that doesn't become a leader.
Right. No, it's really...
If God appeared to me in a burning bush, I'd run for president. But in the meantime, I have no interest in doing so.
Right.
Well, it's also I think that part of that, it's like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle too, because as people start, that's what I've come to realize absolute power corrupts absolutely means. I used to think it was like you get to a certain point and you just get headstrong and you have all the power in the world. But as you start to engage in the act of leadership, there's so many temptations that come in.
Exactly.
It's even if you're somebody who started out with good intentions, the will to resist that.
Right, that's the acting point. You're entirely right.
And you've got to ask yourself too, what do you need to fortify yourself against those temptations?
Right.
When you're exposing, yes, and friends who will tell you the truth, and you need to be embedded in these hierarchical structures. Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
I once had I do a lot of throwaway lines. I love the absurd. It keeps me sane. Out of nowhere on my radio show, I once said, folks, wife in Sanskrit means she who finds flaws in her husband. I totally forgot I ever said that. It was one of my crackpot throwaway lines, and I moved on with the show. You have no idea how many people I have met at speeches. Dennis, that Sanskrit definition of wife, God, is that true?
Well, Ben Shapiro told me that the Hebrew word from which helpmeet is translated in the King James Version.
Yeah.
So it means beneficial adversary, that's a more accurate translation.
The one that means equal. Yes, equal. That's right. It means his equal. It's never translated correctly.
Right.
The Hebrew is a helpmate who is equal to him. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so does it have that beneficial adversary flavor?
Yes, because neged also means against.
Right. And there's a biological principle.
So the Sanskrit was right.
That's right. It's called opponent processing. And if you want to make it's partly why we have two hemispheres and not one. If you want to make a very finely gradated discrimination, judgment, you need two opposing forces. And so, for example, imagine you want to just do something as simple as move your hand smoothly this way. Okay, you can do that, and it's pretty smooth. But this is way smoother. And you do that by pushing against, and then you can calibrate unbelievably precisely. And so if you have this adversarial relationship, then you can calibrate much more precisely.
Incidentally, how we've discussed, that's also true conservatism and true liberalism. as a force to negotiate complex change in a manner that's smooth.
Right.
Corrupted, it's a mess.
Yeah, well, the conservatives stand for what is, and the liberals in some stand for what could be.
It's the brakes and the gas.
And then you have the logos that mediates between those two. Yeah, that's the necessity for free speech. Okay, so
You said something to the effect that how people behave or is their greatest argument for God or something. Do you recall just saying that? I know you said something analogous, but it just triggered something that I feel also very keenly. The greatest argument for atheism is never given by atheists. It's given by bad religious people. Good religious people are the best argument for God's existence, and bad religious people are the best argument for atheism.
All the people who comment on my biblical lectures who are atheists, who've come to appreciate Genesis, they almost all say the same thing. They said, I was so brutalized by bad religious people when I was a kid that it turned me against not only God, but religion.
I have a prayer. May all bad religious people either become good or atheist.
Yeah. So we don't know. We don't know how much damage.
The third wish.
That's good.
After that.
There you go. All right. Hey, well, look, I'm batting 2 for 2, as we say in America, too. Those of you
All right,
I don't know.
We've got through.
There's a lovely story of Coleridge, if I may just interject, of where he used to go on holiday on the south coast of England, and sometimes there were cargo from vessels that were shipwrecked. And the locals would look out for these shipwrecks because, of course, of the valuable things they would discover. And apparently, Coleridge was observing this one morning on his morning constitutional, and was recorded saying, "Ah, the providential shipwreck. Maybe I'm a providential shipwreck." And I think that that's, of course, a deep, I mean, from the poet of the Ancient Mariner, but that's a deeply...
It's not such a bad way to conceptualize yourself. And I think when you love someone, you sort of conceptualize themselves that way too, because this is especially true within families, because you're sort of thrown into your family, and so you're sort of with people who are on average like other people, and they have their idiosyncrasies and their weaknesses, but the fact that you love them means that you do regard them as providential shipwrecks. You could replace them with something perfect, but then they wouldn't be the person that you love.
I'm just mesmerized. I'm sorry. I stopped at providential shipwreck. And I was thinking, when I called my wife tonight, honey, you are my providential shipwreck.
Yeah.
Let us know how it goes.
I will let you know how it goes. And as well as I know her, I'm not sure how she will react.
I'm sensing a new line of Douglas Hallmark cards.
Well, Providence may have a shipwreck in your future.
That is so to be completely unhelpful, the Torah has an incredible task. And so does all biblical literature, but the Torah is the oldest. It had to be important and meaningful to people in the late Bronze Age and to us. And that it succeeds is not argument 56 for me that it's a divine text. But they undoubtedly understood this story better than we do.
But Dennis, would you also say that it's part of Scripture and divine revelation that it's both accessible, easy for an ordinary person to understand.
That's good.
And yet hard enough.
That's right.
For philosophers.
That's why we're sitting around.
That's a Jacob's
He's
ladder.
the regular Joe. I like that. That cracked me up. Yes.
Well, and as the regular Joe, I just want to point out.
Wait, forgive me. I got a call from a guy in San Francisco. This is the joy of doing a radio show. Who was the head of No Circ. Which, needless to say, would be in San Francisco. Not only anti-circumcision, but was working to have his foreskin restored. And I will never forget. I was a little. It's very hard to stun me after all these years of radio. And I said, "I'm sorry. Did I get that right? You are working to restore your foreskin?" And then I don't normally insult callers. I just said, "You must be very bored." And that was the end of that.
I love that it's called No Cirque, and he called into your show's like Cirque du Soleil. It's like a celebration. He needs some branding help. I have a very quick question. Does anyone know, and I imagine this is a Dennis question, why are some of the verbs italicized and the nouns, I mean, just specific words are italicized in the text and others aren't, and it seems somewhat arbitrary. Does anyone have an explanation for that?
Show me. That would be in the King James, right? Yeah, I don't. I'm using. So, give me an example of an italicized.
Pharaoh's heart is hardened. The is italicized.
Yeah. That's very. There
He
must
says,
be a
"Take
reason
thy rod
that they
and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent."
I know a
answer
little bit
because-
about 17th century
Go ahead.
italicization. It really has no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, that's
That's the best answer possible.
I don't know.
It looks like an overwrought screenplay, like if you're an amateur screenwriter and they put everything in caps, like to make the action verbs more action-y.
Or a YouTube commenter. You can tell
right.
this is important because it's in caps and it's bold, plus their exclamation
And exclamation points,
Yeah.
right? Exactly.
The emojis are also puzzling, but we can deal with that.
There's also well, I think partly what's going on here is that Pharaoh is himself being tested about whether he will true himself to the principle of all reality, to God. And the answer, of course, turns out to be no, he won't. And a lot of what's going on in these chapters is the demonstration of the sovereignty of the principle against the resistance of Pharaoh. And so, I mean, the story could have gone differently. I mean, that is to say, Pharaoh could have said, hey, you know what? I totally get this whole thing that you're revealing to me. I get it. I've been out of line. You know what? Go ahead. That would have been a different story, of course. That's not the story we have.
Leave it to Blackwood to be a Pharaoh ally.
I'm not a Pharaoh ally. I'm saying the story is such that...
I also love how we've attributed "do not lie" to Jordan. That's great. That's my highlight.
It's Jordan's explication
I've
of
just
the
made
commandment.
it popular.
Did you not make
again.
that up? Did you come up with that?
Bring back not lying.
Are you saying that's in here somewhere?
It's a terrible thing to have to bring back. It's like, remember this rule?
But
I just want to know. I'm very curious. You said, and I didn't obviously want to interrupt. So you said that children normally share food, Jordan. So my non-scientific experience has been that when I've been to birthday parties of little kids, you see kids with 8 cupcakes, barely able to hold them. Share one with little Devin here. No.
Yeah, well, it's context dependent because you do see flips of that with children as well. But there are certainly situations in which they'll absolutely feed other people and they'll share food with their parents. And so it's
Okay, fine.
Children flip frames of conception quite quickly, and they can certainly snap into a very selfish mode.
there's also a cupcake exemption.
Oh,
Yeah, there is that too. Yeah, and maybe there's birthday party cupcake
That's right,
exemption.
because I've only seen it with cupcakes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah, right,
Yes.
right.
Try
All
it
right,
with try it with celery and see what happens.
By the way, since you have forced me to say what I just said earlier about the lack of conception in the Torah of these words, equality and freedom, and this will blow my Christian friends' minds. I don't think love as a noun appears in the Torah. Love as a verb, definitely. The Torah cares how you be. It's really not an abstract instrument. This
So is that
how you
associated with
behave.
doing? Yeah.
Doing.
Right.
And I have totally, as a Jew and as a human, internalized that. My whole thesis on happiness, which is a huge part of my thinking and my writing, is you should act happy even if you do not feel it, because you owe it to others to have a happy disposition. So I have taken, I realize subconsciously.
So are you actually happy to be here?
I am acting happy.
Well, you're convincing us. So that'll do.
All that matters.
That'll do.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
But I really imbibed this in my life. I am such a behaviorist, and I know I got it from the Torah and Judaism. So, I'm sorry, but my all-time favorite anecdote, 4th grade in yeshiva. I remember very little from 4th grade. The rabbi announces okay, boys, because it was only incumbent upon the boys. This is an Orthodox Jewish school. He goes, it's time to daven mincha, meaning it's time for the afternoon prayer. And being who I always was, very respectfully, but with chutzpah, I walked over and I go, Rabbi Fostag, I'm not in the mood to daven mincha. The guy was from Eastern Europe. He spoke English, but he had clearly never, it was obvious to me, heard mood and pray in the same sentence. And the guy thinks, he looks up, he strokes his beard, and he goes, Shmuel Prager, that's my Hebrew name, Shmuel Prager is not in the mood to daven mincha. So what? The man changed my life. I mean it utterly sincerely. I have said to myself, when I have not been in the mood to do the right thing all of my life, so what?
Right. Why is it about you?
And that is so Torah-like. It's you don't feel it? Big deal. It's why the Torah is not conceptual. Act it, have a great day.
Snakes.
It's always interesting to me how the icon carver's brain works, because you need something. If God's moving through a person, it's like, well, how do you portray that? If you're making the action figure, what does he look like, right? And there's this amazing conversation, not to get us too far derailed, between Lucas, Kasdan, and Spielberg when they were developing Indiana Jones. And the conversation you can find, and they're like, well, he needs a different kind of weapon. What's a weapon no one's had? Like, how about a whip, right? And we need him to have a hat, but the hat should have a personality, it should have a life of its own. And so part of when we're trying to substantiate, when we're trying to make literal the symbolism, it can't just be that God, like if a wizard just points at somebody, well, what's a wizard look like? We need props. The Pharaoh has right? And so this is, of course, something that you are dealing with in your depictions, or else everyone would just look like a Ken doll, right? Everyone would look the same.
Yeah, but I think modern fiction has actually been very good. Like something like fantasy, like Tolkien, the way they illustrate it, has been very good at making the costumes and the representation of the person as an extension of what they are, so that you see it immediately.
That's why Gandalf is such a striking figure with his staff, and that he can thrust it into the ground with force and cause.
That's how I imagine Moses doing it.
Right. Bang, exactly.
Not like this.
That's
like
Jonathan.
this.
That's how Jonathan carves too. He just shows up.
I just like.
We don't ever want to confuse freedom with chaos. They're not the same thing. If you're playing a chess game, you're free to do an almost infinite number of things on the chess game board, but you have to abide by the rules, and you have to attempt to win in the proper manner. And if I used to play a game with my students in my class, and I'd go up to someone when we were talking about such things and say, okay, do you want to play a game? Some random student, and they'd say yes. And I'd say, okay, you move first. And then they had no idea what to do. It's like, well, and I said, well, you could do anything you wanted. It's like, well, I'm lost. It's like, yeah, that's exactly. When you can do anything you want, you think that's freedom.
You better not ask the wrong student that.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask you. All right. And the magicians
we're now hitting what I consider the funniest verse in the Torah.
All right. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments.
Okay, why is that so funny?
Because there's no more water to turn into blood.
Well, they're doing what Moses did, and they're judging too.
They're saying to Pharaoh, hey, we can ruin our water supply too. I have always found this to be hilarious. And doesn't Pharaoh go, what are you, morons?
Right.
He ruins the water and you can do it too? Thank you.
Don't they do the same later with the gnats or the flies? He says just to add to it.
The flies. They can't.
Yeah, you think, that is very
they also say it's all the water in the land is already turned. So it's like, what are they, like they're seeking out new water to ruin?
They had some water, apparently.
And the magicians.
Kids in Jewish life sing the following song. There were, one morning when Pharaoh woke in his bed, there were frogs on his head and frogs in his bed, frogs on his nose and frogs on his toes, frogs here, frogs there, frogs were jumping everywhere.
Well, this is a kind of comical plague.
Exactly, certainly, but the point that I love about that is the only reason these kids know about Pharaoh is because of the frogs. The king, the demigod of Egypt, is known to Jewish children thousands of years later because of frogs.
What did Nietzsche say? You might think you're done with the past, but that doesn't mean the past thinks it's done with you. And that's like.
By the way, you've made me rethink Nietzsche. I just wanted you to know he had a lot of profound things to say.
Oh yeah. He's something.
He got I assume he has such a bad name because the Nazis liked him. I mean, why does he have such a bad name?
His sister warped a lot of his writing, and then there were derivatives of it that were used by the Nazis to justify their actions. But Nietzsche's philosophy is he had an absolute horror of absolutist states, and that's crystal clear. And so, no,
and
it's
the consequences of the death of God.
Oh yes, and there's no one more prophetic about that except maybe Dostoevsky.
And he always spoke very highly of you, Dennis.
Thank you. I didn't want to say.
And there's a negative miracle aspect here too. It might be that people are less convinced about positive miracles, but if something negative enough happens to you, that's outside your realm of expectation, sometimes that can actually wake you up.
Yeah, but an example?
Solzhenitsyn?
Death or a catastrophe in your life.
I see. Oh, that's it. But the people see that as a miracle, though.
Well, that's a good question. We tend to think of a miracle as only something positive, but these plagues are obviously miracles.
That's right. I like that. That's fascinating.
And it's a lot more difficult to deny a negative miracle. Yeah.
I've never thought of that. Am I happy I came?
Yeah, there's nothing happier than a negative miracle, man.
I always think of.
Here's a truly fascinating thing about the Hebrew, where it says stiffened. He stiffened his. First of all, he did it to himself. He stiffened his heart. Okay. So I hope I can make this clear, and if I do, you'll find this fascinating. The word is vayichbad, which literally means made heavy. Okay, there's no one would doubt that. I'm not reading anything into it. Kaved means heavy in Hebrew. Now here's the beauty. Honor your father and mother. The commandment is the same exact verb. Honor literally means make heavy. You should hold your parents. No, you should hold your parents in a heavy way. That's what it really etymologically means. It's correct to translate it as honor, but it literally means make your parents heavy in your eyes. So here's the killer. There is another way of therefore translating this, and it just occurred to me today. I wish when I wrote my commentary, I realized this. You can actually translate this as Pharaoh honored his heart and didn't send the people out.
Dennis, you eventually go one higher. The glory of God is the same word. In other words,
that's
God's
correct.
glory
that is right.
the ultimate weightiness.
How'd you know that?
In the universe. No, I think, compared with...
He's smart.
Yeah.
Compared with Milan Kundera. But you've got the reverse of Milan Kundera, the unbearable...
That was precious.
He just knows some stuff.
That is clear beyond doubt.
It's a constant shock.
That's correct. That is the word. That is exactly for honor and glory.
The ultimate reality of reality has weightiness.
That's right.
Yeah.
When you fast, this is something very cool about fasting, and of course it makes perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective, is when you fast enough so that you start digesting your own body tissues, the body tissue that you digest first is the damaged tissue. And so then you can die a little bit, because that's what happens when you're starting to consume yourself, is you die a little bit, but the consequence of that is that you live longer. There are studies on rats showing that if you have them fast regularly, and that keeps them at a suboptimal body weight, they'll live up to 40% longer.
But they're also way more irritable.
Well, yes, they're
So you got irritable
but then
rats.
You're
like,
knee-deep
great,
in angry
great,
rats,
another
and they
year
live
with
forever.
an angry rat. Right. Gotta be careful.
Is that true, by the way? Are they more irritable?
No.
Not at all.
He just knows he's more irritable.
Because
That's what he knows.
I'd never heard that, and I was curious. Anyway, how would you know if a rat is irritable? Now that I think of it, they're not exactly benevolent.
They're weightier. They're more condensed into their essential ratitude.
My goodness.
One of the things I've been thinking about in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war is that, well, how often did people sit down with Putin in the last 3 years? Like almost never? Well, if he has a tilt towards paranoia, and he is a Russian, so he might, then that's not such a good idea. And you don't know. And I would say that's one thing perhaps that Trump was good at, to sit down with people like Kim Jong-un and perhaps with Putin, and to at least be there in the same room with them in some credible way. We have no idea how much international peace depends on those strange bonds of at least quasi-trust that are forged not as a consequence of the shared propositional beliefs, but just as a consequence of that recognition of common humanity. It isn't obvious at all to what degree you can get that in the deepest sense through
when you eat
mere
with
abstract
someone,
communication.
Eating with someone is probably one of the most primordial things that you can do. It is so profound that it's like it's beyond rational discussion. It precedes any political discussion you could have, which is why it's so traditional for heads of state to eat together, to have.
You can at least see that they don't steal your food. Well, there were times, or kill you for it.
Yeah,
I mean, there
yeah.
were times where that was like,
Yeah.
especially if you're eating with a stranger, that was a crucial issue, especially if you were both actually hungry. So it was a real test of, well, it really is a real test of civilization to see if people can sit down and share a meal.
When I speak to singles on my radio show, it's I'm just realizing it now because of this discussion. So it goes from if they meet through an internet site, which by the way, I recommend to singles all the time. And they meet through an internet site. So then they will email, then they will talk, then they might video, then they rarely go for a meal. They'll meet at Starbucks.
Right.
When it graduates to a meal, everybody knows this is a bit more serious.
This is the beginning of something intimate.
A meal. So it's a very interesting thing about the meal.
Yeah. Well, it's a very embodied act. Unlike the rest of those acts that can be mediated electronically.
Well, Starbucks is embodied too, but it's not a meal.
Right.
It's a coffee.
Right. You don't use your teeth on coffee.
By the way, this food thing just occurred to me because I had thought about this, but I forgot about it until now. So in the Holy of Holies is the Ark with the 10 Commandments and one other thing, a table. And in Jewish life, the table is the center of religious life. It is the table at home is more important than the synagogue. Ask any religious Jew. There's no debate about what I'm saying. The center of Jewish religious life is the house, and the center of religious life in the house is the table. And I can say that the Friday night Shabbat dinner and Saturday Shabbat lunch in my upbringing were more formative than any other single event. It is where I learned to think, learned to speak. There was no tolerance for a stupid comment from me. And I learned, because my brother's 6 years older, so he dominated conversation with my father at the Shabbat table. And then when I finally spoke up, I remember the very first time I spoke up, my father said, "That's bullshit." And it was the greatest thing he could have said to me. There was no, "Oh, that's really sweet, Dennis. What a thought." I got none of that. And to this day, I have always asked when I speak, what would my father say?
That is what you should ask when you speak.
That's right.
That's a prayer, man.
Is it possible to not feel sad for the Egyptians and to not feel sympathy and to not wish that the Pharaoh had broken before? And it's like you get there and you're like, oh.
Dennis, how about you?
I hope Pharaoh gets his.
Yeah.
I admit.
I knew I could count on you in that regard.
What about the Egyptians?
I was like, that's why I was just waiting. I was
Is that a good sign or a bad sign?
Well,
we
he's
know
clearly
Dennis
the
likes
villain.
revenge.
He's clearly the villain. And
Yes,
there is that
exactly.
hope.
I want villains to get punished. I don't know.
But do you want the villains to learn before they have to pay the ultimate price?
That's such a Christian question.
I know. That's why I wanted to get Prager's take on this.
I don't give a damn if they learn before they die. I want them to die. Because I'm more concerned with good people. I don't want good people to suffer. So whether Pharaoh learns or not is between Pharaoh and Pharaoh. But between Pharaoh and me, he has to be punished. But the great lesson, which is of course unlearned, like most great lessons, is people do really like tyrants. What percentage of Harvard seniors do you think could identify Pol Pot? I would say 5%.
Yeah, I think you're probably being optimistic on that front.
Okay.
I mean, when I taught about the Gulag catastrophes or the catastrophes of the Soviet Union,
Gulag too. Just say
hardly
Gulag.
any of my students
That's
have ever
right.
heard of any of that.
Hardly any of them today have heard of Solzhenitsyn.
Oh, sir. Oh, that's a given. But Pol Pot, one of the great mass murderers, he killed a quarter of his own people. By the way, these tyrants killed. Hitler is the only of the tyrants that didn't mostly slaughter his own people. Yeah. Pol Pot killed Cambodians. Mao killed Chinese. Stalin killed Russians. And they're still held in esteem.
How about Mussolini?
Well, he wasn't a mass murderer. He's not in their category. He was a tyrant, but he's not in their category. Italians don't make that type.
The Italians make lousy tyrants.
Yeah.
All right, so back to 11:1 here. And thus ye shall eat it, with your loins girded. Now you gird your loins for battle, eh? And girding your loins is, what does that refer to precisely? What do you do when you gird your loins?
Probably to be ready to escape. I think it was
You just tie all the stuff up. Tie it all up. That's what it is.
Right.
Girdle. I mean,
so you're preparing.
You've got your belt cinched.
No, but it says
You're ready to
belt.
leave. Yeah. Okay. So you're
They didn't
prepared.
wear underwear in that time. They didn't wear underwear. So if you're going to do something that demands a lot of, you would gird your loins.
Okay.
Yeah, no one needs to go freestyle off into what's coming
Into
here.
the desert.
No, that's right. It's not a good
Commando.
Not a good look.
That's exactly. It's right.
So this is probably not known. I may well be known at this table, but I don't think for the general public, because in the West we identify blood with death, and in the Torah blood is identified with life.
Yes,
Which it is. And by the way, it says it in Genesis. One of the few times that there is a law in Genesis. You may not eat the blood, ki hadam hu anefesh, because the blood is the soul of the living thing.
Yeah, but I think for Christians it's the same. Like we wouldn't say things like we're saved by the blood of Christ if we didn't believe that it was life that was poured over us.
He was
So welcome.
Also, as a symbol, I mean, it's
I didn't say that. I just said he was Jewish.
No, but I'm curious about this idea of putting the blood on the post. If you had some
Yes, that's
insights
what about
that.
it. It's affirming life. If
Well, if God wasn't
didn't
on the side of
smite,
the Jews, he'd sure know where they
then,
were.
Hey, a Jew lives here, and we're in trouble.
But it's a symbol that anticipates the second Passover, because I think there are two Passovers. There's the first Passover,
Yes.
right?
Well, the second one is if you miss the first.
Right.
It's very interesting law. In case you were out of town, you really have a chance at a second one.
But I mean, the second Passover through the people of Israel pass over the Red Sea. That is to say.
You didn't mean literally.
No.
That there is a second Passover in Numbers. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
That's because Jews are always late.
there's also
All non-wasps are late. That's a funny thing I realize. One of the reasons I am a waspophile.
Part of white privilege.
I love it. I am a waspophile. I think this is a great invention, the Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I really do. They made the greatest country in the world. What else can I say? And so everybody thinks Jews are late, and they go, Jewish Standard Time. Then I, in my interaction with other communities, Armenians, Armenian Standard Time, Iranian Standard Time. Then I realize every bloody group except white Anglo-Saxon Protestants is late.
We're hoping you guys will catch up, man.
I love it. When things start on time, I show up at speeches differently if ethnics invite me or if it's a Presbyterian church that invites me. By the way, forgive me, but you'll love this. When a Jewish kid, a religious kid raised in a religion, speaks about the Exodus, not just kid, I take that back, adults, we always say we were slaves, and that's the way it is in the Haggadah, not they were slaves. I wish Americans said we, forgive me, fought the British. Or we fought for independence.
You're welcome back anytime, Dan.
I don't know if you'll want us right now. This is a very serious problem.
Make America
I just
great
want to
Britain again.
add two very exactly correct.
Okay. So I would like to point out that we've got through one one verse so far. That we should probably proceed.
Well, it was a biggie.
It was a big one. It was a big one.
We need to get Shapiro in here reading.
7 days.
By the way, I will get a ski jet. Is that what it's called?
Jet
I will buy one for anyone who could name all the holidays of the Torah.
Now, does this include all the people who are listening? Careful what you offer.
Send in your responses. No, I'm serious. Do you think you could? It's an interesting question. And by the way, there are 7. Again, 7.
Well, I can't.
Come on, Greg. Oh, don't let us down.
I'm going to kick this to Oz.
You've got us, Dennis.
The vast majority of Jews couldn't do it. They would, because one is very obscure, and I have all right. So, Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, which is called the Day of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, Passover, Pentecost, Shavuot, Tabernacle, Sukkot, and then the 7th, which is the one that trips up everybody, including most Jews, called Shmini Atzeret. It's his own holiday. It's after the 7 days of Tabernacles is the 8th day. Shmini means 8th. Atzeret is convocation, meeting. It is the only holiday that has no purpose other than having a good time. It doesn't commemorate anything. It is a fascinating thing. So I don't work on Jewish holidays that are in the Torah. So I remember many of you know Larry Elder, who ran for governor in California, a dear friend of mine. So we used to be on the same station in Los Angeles. And I would be on in the afternoon, and he would follow me in his talk show. And so I said, so Larry, I just want you to know I won't be on tomorrow. Oh, he goes, why? I said, well, I don't broadcast on Jewish holidays. And he goes, which holiday is it? And I go, Shmini Atzeret. And the guy was convinced I made it up to take the day off. A comedian I had on my radio show told me what every joke must have, and it permanently stayed with me, and he was right. Surprise and a victim. Analyze any joke you know, and you will find that is the case. Even if the victim is yourself, doesn't matter.
That's the best kind of joke.
The best,
That's the best kind of joke. The English are particularly good at that. Is that self-denigrating
Self-lacerating.
comedy? You bet, you bet. And that's
Is that true?
Not at all. Not at all.
We are not meant to just celebrate the terror that is, like you were saying about we're not meant to just celebrate the terror that is brought upon the Egyptians either.
Because it's the end of anti-creation. It's got to be comprehensive. It's got to be total. Yeah.
Thinking that'll be my new gesture. Everybody will know what I mean now.
I've always thought about the Jewish emphasis on education is like it's the one thing you can take with you as you're driven from place to place.
And a violin.
That's right.
Well, in a book. Right, or a scroll. Right. And
By
there's
the
a
way,
lot.
your comment reminded me. You'll enjoy this. So this is not meant as a joke, by the way, but it is funny nevertheless. The rabbis asked, "So what has God been doing since creation?" It's a very fair question, and their answer is bringing couples together, which shows you how hard it is.
And when the stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it. That's his symbol of assimilation, eh? And he shall be as one that is born in the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. Yeah, so that's the marker of belonging, and that's why that's so
it
important.
actually also happens to be an external skin which is removed, like a garment of skin which is removed.
Right. Well, and it's also something that allows the phallocentric fellas to shine forth in some real sense.
Yeah.
Well, and you got to put blood in the deal. Like it's not an easy
Skin in the
point of
game,
entry.
right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
I was trying to avoid that, Pajot, but I'm glad you.
No, that's good. That's good.
Well done.
That's tefillin in Jewish history. That's the boxes that you see on religious Jews when they pray, the black box at the forehead and the black box on the arm. They each contain a portion of the Torah on parchment in those boxes. There are 2 examples of this. This is called tefillin. In English, it's phylacteries. I never met any human who knew what phylacteries was who didn't know what tefillin was. So it's a useless translation. But that's what it is. It's those boxes.
So this is another
and the
injunction
straps.
to remember.
That's
To
right. I
remember
never
the
thought of it.
spirit of that which took you out. You know?
Well, I guess Jews aren't quite prepared yet, maybe over the course of generations, to say God took the Jews out of Hitler's Europe. It's hard to say, given the staggering number who were murdered.
Right. Well, I think it's a mistake it's also a mistake not to remember the horror, because you also want to appreciate the depths of the tyranny.
Right.
And then if something could overcome even that, what must it be?
I think we should remember both. You've affected this Jew. It's a very powerful point.
Well, you know, I spent a lot of time studying the Holocaust, and what I learned from it wasn't the misery. Although I learned that. It was that something overcame the misery.
And what was it that overcame the misery?
Well, that's what we're all trying to figure out, Dennis. Really. I mean, really, that's what we're all trying to figure out. Well, the whole injunction was, remember, so it doesn't happen again. Okay, remember what? Remember the misery? Or remember the spirit of Solzhenitsyn? Or do you remember the spirit of Viktor Frankl, right? What we're remembering, that which enabled us to overcome the tyranny and the malevolence? It's got to be that, because we can't just remember the terror.
It was Allied tanks that overcame the tyranny.
Yeah, well, that's also something, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. That's
Yeah.
why I'm a tank fan.
Right.
I have a thought about what you just said, about what's different. And so what's interesting for me is what this is. So first of all, it's very humbling for me to be here, because the level
Yes, it
of...
should be.
That's right.
That's partly why you were invited.
That's right.
Just for the humbling, man.
It's true. It's true, though.
Well, science is actually the process, not the consequence, in some real sense, right? And
You sound like a science denier.
Well, certainly. Well, one of the things you learn, Thomas Kuhn
science
pointed this
humbler.
out too, is that, right, because when a novelist, Greg can speak on this more, but when a novelist represents the world, you're going to base it to some degree on your experience, because you have nothing else to talk about otherwise, but then you incorporate all sorts of other things into the story that make it, in some sense, more than what, it's two ways of looking at it. It's more than what merely happened, but there's another way of looking at it, whereas it's a truer and more universal account of what actually happened.
It's also the most inane, like, chyron that comes up at the beginning of a movie where they say, based on real events.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
as opposed to what?
Yeah. Right.
Like,
Yeah.
what's another option?
Superb.
Like,
That's
where-
great.
There's a story about John Lewis. Then it might be apocryphal and I might be misquoting it, which let me just undermine the story 100 ways. But I believe that this is right. That when he was on the bridge in Edmund Pettus, part of what their training was for nonviolence was to envision the cops beating them as boys, as sons, and that was what held them in restraint, and that's what tacks to a transcendental value that can be transformational. So I offer that to Dennis Prager, Angel of Vengeance over here.
But Dennis, you're bringing in.
By the way, I just want to say on behalf of the Israelites, whom I share the Torah's view of generally, 40 years of manna is a challenge. I think we have to be honest here in assessing 40 years of the greatest pizza possible. So the rabbis actually, you'll love this. The rabbis, they knew, these were not dummies, these rabbis. They knew 40 years of something is a problem. So they developed the belief, and it's traditional belief. It's not Torah-based, but it's traditional, that the manna tasted any way in which you wanted it to taste. And I remember hearing this in third grade and thinking, wow, pastrami on rye anytime I want it? And then I envied the Hebrews in the desert.
That's a very Jewish story. I'd like to point that out. Right.
Wait,
to the
why is it
pastrami
a Jew?
on rye.
Oh yeah, the pastrami on rye is Jewish.
Yeah,
No. If you want to imagine BLT as a non-Jew, you are totally
Here's the other,
okay with
I
that.
picked the pastrami on
The
rye.
other part that's totally Jewish is that literally you have like food from the heavens, and you go immediately to the overripe cantaloupe complaint with it. It's like it's literally food that has descended from the heavens, and you're like,
That's
for
for
40 years.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. That's why it's a perfectly apt story.
Like, can we get pretzel bread? Like,
No, that's right.
I'm here as a man who's learned to do what Jordan Peterson tells him to do.
And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and did obeisance and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare, and they came into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done unto Pharaoh. So what have you been up to, Moses? It's like, well, there was a sequence of plagues, and there's this whole Red Sea thing. How about you, Jethro? Yeah. And how's every little thing? Yeah.
Part of the genius of the Emperor Augustus when he gets power after the end of the Civil War in 31 BC is that he presents himself as living a very kind of monastic life. He lives in a little hut on the top of the Palatine Hill, and he's saying he launches like a big back to basics campaign, stress on the family, simplicity.
He renounces all his titles.
That's right, renounces all his titles as he's acquiring more and more power and founding one of the greatest sort of imperial dynasties the world's ever known.
It's funny. Now I'm going to make the point I debated whether to make because I don't like to differ with Plato. Who am I? But if the only thing I knew about a person was that he was an ascetic, I would not vote for him.
So don't you, when you're starting with young people, don't you start with something that's obvious to them that it's true, and then work from there? So there's a lot of things we know. We know that we're more capable, better than dogs, right? Although some dogs are better than some people. And we know that, right? And so what's higher about us? And then imagine that perfected. I think that's C.S. Lewis's argument for God that he makes over and over. And it's also all over Thomas Aquinas. And that means that there seems to be an order of the beings, and it seems to go up.
Otherwise, what would we strive towards?
That's my strategy, exactly.
Well, they don't even accept any longer. It is quite popular on the left that we're not superior to animals.
Yeah, it's because they're. But the
They don't
thing
believe
is,
that.
Dennis,
Nobody
is
really believes
they
that.
don't stop striving.
I think they do. The anti-humanist element of the climate change movement, and I don't deny climate change, just for the record, but the hysteria leading to the belief that human beings are a blight on nature, animals are not, is very deep at this time.
The movie, The Matrix, you guys watch movies? That's a turning point when Agent Smith is interrogating Morpheus under torture. And he moves the sweat off his forehead and tastes it and smells it. You're a virus. I figured out what the human beings are. They're cancer on the earth, right? And that's...
Oh, you see the same thing in the Marvel series where there's a Thanos, who's Thanatos, fundamentally Thanos. He wipes out half of everything for the good of being. So, yes, this is a very deep problem.
On the great issues of our time, I am certain that it's not a matter of faith. I am logically, rationally certain that in America at least, and probably in the West generally, as a generalization with acknowledged exceptions, religious people are far more rational than the radically secular. And as one of the reasons, by the way, that I have come to believe in God is because I realize that my love of reason, why I call my commentary the Rational Bible, is because I use reason. My love of reason is dependent upon there being a God.
Well, Jung, one of the things that really struck me about Jung, and it was a surprise to me when I encountered it, was his insistence in some sense that Catholicism, he just used that as an example, he said, that's as sane as people get. Everything other than that is way worse. And so, despite its peculiarities and eccentricities and medieval madness and all
Voltaire,
of that.
the great atheist, said, I'm an atheist. But frankly, I hope my wife, my butler, my driver, and everyone I work with believes in God.
Yeah, very funny, very funny.
I think it was Chesterton who said that the definition of the madman is not the person who's lost his reason, but who's lost everything except his reason.
Did Chesterton say anything stupid?
No.
Every time, what?
Just as a joke.
In private, maybe.
Oh, in private, that's fine though. That he got it out in private. Chester, I mean, apropos of this, it's attributed to Chesterton. I couldn't verify that he said it, but why not? When people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing. They believe in anything.
Yes. It's been very hard to actually locate that
I
quotation.
know, that's why I said
But
yes.
he ought to have said it.
That's right. No, if
It was
anybody
implicit
did,
in what he said.
it was him.
And a
Right.
lot of what he does say could be distilled into that.
Correct.
remark.
Right.
Yeah, well,
That's
the
how
thing
you
is
Winston Churchill quotes. Too.
Yeah, right.
It's the same thing.
Oh, yeah? Yogi Berra, too?
you can't move forward into the unknown without faith. You can't organize a community without faith. You can't organize yourself without faith. And so if you have no faith, you're disorganized. And so if you do organize yourself, then you have faith in something. And if it's not God, then you have to ask, okay, then, no. What is it?
Right.
What is it? And that's the blindness of the atheist. It's like,
They
well,
say
now your
so
God's
their
implicit.
answer is science.
Yeah.
That's what they
Yeah,
answer.
well,
as if
good
science
luck with
tells me
that.
not to murder.
Yeah.
Or not to steal.
something else.
Or to love my neighbor. What are they talking about when they say science? How could that, what is the moral will of science?
Right. Science is necessarily subordinate to the ethic of inquiry. Exactly. I think I mentioned in the seminar already one of Jung's dictum, which I just love. It was so enlightening to me. He said, the purpose of religious practice is to stop people from having religious experiences. So it's a container, right, to stop that.
Mediate is a better word.
Mediate. It is. It was a joke. I mean, he didn't make jokes that often, but that was one, and it's a good joke. It's like, and no wonder. It's like, you want to have a religious experience, do you? Really? You really want that?
Is Jordan
It's like-
trying to convert the rest of you to Young?
Only implicitly. He hid the fact that he was a Christian.
You said poor old
Even from
Moses.
himself.
So
Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's.
Free yourself.
there was a
from.
chair in my house. I wonder if any of you had this, and I don't think it even exists today. There was a chair in my house was known as Dad's chair. The kids didn't sit in it. That is a perfect manifestation of honoring, and your point is critical. That we're not
That's what
commanded to love our parents. People need to understand. We have to love our neighbor. We have to love God. We have to love the stranger, but we don't have to love our parents. And there is no other thing that we are demanded that we honor other than God. That is how critical the parental role is.
Do you think that the fact that we've lost Mr. and Mrs. is a reflection of that dishonor?
It's all the egalitarian thing. Parents and children, before my father died at the age of 96, I had him on my radio show every birthday. It was a big hit with my listeners. He was a character, my father. And he would, I'm sorry?
I bet he was.
Oh, yes, it goes down, it's genetic, I have to admit. It was like clockwork. I'd go, so Dad, and it really interested me. He was born in 1918. This is a long time ago. And even then, I would say, so Dad, what is the biggest difference between America when you grow up and America today? And I wouldn't ask every year, so he wouldn't necessarily remember what he had said. But every time I asked it, he had the same exact answer. And that was, the kids rule the house.
By the way, we have a dad's chair in my house, except half the time the dogs are in it.
That's allowed.
I may have mentioned last
Because
time
the Ten Commandments were not given to the dogs.
a terrible story of Salvador Dali, who had a terrible relationship with his father. And one day he had a huge row, stormed out of the house, went back home and masturbated and put his semen in an envelope, put on the back of the envelope, paid in full, and gave it to his dad, as if that was it. Whereas you think we owe our parents life, we owe them identity, and we owe them the very first beginnings in the formation, values and all sorts of things. So back to Stephen's humility, we owe so much to them.
Or any Christians at this table feel you're bound. So this is not a challenge. This is I'm in love with America's Christians. To be perfectly open about it. Not all, but more,
At least those
very
around this
touched.
table.
It is mutual. Thank you. It is a very beautiful thing in my life.
Just to really break this down, and to confess amongst my brothers here, I really struggle with this personally, the Sabbath. I mean, struggle personally to take a Sabbath. And maybe I'm not the only one with iPhones and constant distractions, and I have a busy job, and it's important. I think the work I'm doing is important. As if you're lucky to have work that you cherish, it's good to do that work, and there's always a reason to keep working on Sunday. If you don't do that, then you think that. So what I want to ask humbly of all of you, what are your own practices? What makes
That's what I asked.
What makes a
I'm
good
glad
Sabbath?
you're asking, and God bless you for struggling.
I'm very bad at it too. You know, and I know this is wrong. When one of the things I did as a clinical psychologist is I had all these high-end lawyers in my practice, and they were usually senior partners of large law firms. And the deal was that we made with the firms was you send us your best people, and we will make them more productive. They'll have more billable hours, but we work for them. We're not working for you. And so I faced this conundrum with my clients because these were people who were worth a lot of money per hour. And they were making $750 to $2,000 an hour. And they were working 16-hour days. I mean, I had a woman, one of my clients, she bought a new microwave because she could microwave her coffee in 10 seconds instead of 20 seconds in the morning. Like, I mean, her life was scheduled. She was hyper-productive. And a lot of these people struggled, as you might expect, with work-life balance, that cliche. And one of the things I learned quite rapidly was that I could get these people to schedule out vacations 2 or 3 months in advance because they couldn't work fewer hours a day. The competition was just too intense. And it wasn't even easy for them to work fewer hours a week. But if they scheduled 3 months ahead, they could take 3 or 4 days, and then they could do that. And what we invariably found was, and this is something to think about when you're being driven by that demon of work, is they became more productive. So they got a rest, and their billable hours went up because the gain they obtained in efficiency more than, well, and right, it's not surprising in some sense, right? But it was interesting to see that so starkly indicated even to these people. And so you might ask yourself, is like, well, you have all these wonderful opportunities and you want to have your nose to the grindstone and make sacrifices to the proper gods, but it could be that if you took a day off a week, which I don't do, by the way, you'd be much better at that. Also because you'd have the opportunity now and then to stop focusing so intensely on the task at hand and to allow yourself to emerge into a state of contemplative reverie, which is indistinguishable from the freedom you need to be creative.
But no argument, every argument you made is impeccable, and none will change his behavior. That's, well, for good reason. But this is critical. The only reason I don't work 7 days a week is because I think God commanded me. The only reason that we have the meals with our kids as intently as we did, and every Jewish family is the same that has this, they're at least 3 hours. You just sit and talk. From everything from, is there an afterlife, to how the local baseball team did. Everything is talked about. I learned how to think at the Shabbat table, not at school. Because my father and my brother would talk. My brother's 6 years older than me, went to Columbia, then Harvard, big intellectual. They would have these discussions. Finally, in middle teenage, I started to pipe up, and my father would look at me and go, that's nonsense. And I learned to say to myself, that's nonsense at the Shabbat table, not at school. Only because God says keep it, do we keep it? Do I keep it?
What do we mean by keep it holy?
Well, let's go back to the Lord is holy, and we're to be like him. And the essence of holiness in Hebrew, Janice, you'd have to come in again, is the set-apartness.
Correct.
The distinct uniqueness of it. Now, in English, my growing up, it became a sort of uncomfortable form of goody-goodiness.
Yes.
And then holier than thou.
Right.
But that idea of distinct, you could say, countercultural set-apartness.
Yeah.
We should be countercultural.
That's it. You hit it on the
people.
nose. Baseball is every day. Scrabble with the family is not every day. They would never play it if it were not Shabbat.
So part of it is that it should be, it's bounded in some sense from the activities that characterize the banalities of the week.
I was going to say to Stephen, my wife says to me, emails drive you, and reading a certain type of book drives me, and things. So she bans that totally. And I kicked for a while, but I do no emails on Sunday. And I don't read certain, sort of.
So it has to be set apart. So it has to be others.
I'll read
Other
fiction.
than,
I'll
right.
read
Other than
fiction.
and higher than.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
Right. So because we talked about the utility of ritual, and part of what we're hashing out here is the idea that in some sense the Sabbath is a ritual of not engaging in your normal sacrificial rituals. And so then what do you think about the idea that engaging in creative endeavor? I mean, because God is obviously in some fundamental sense a creator.
Right, but you can't create on Shabbat.
Kids, that's
The
it.
only
It's
thing
a
you
day
can
of rest
create
from
on Shabbat is a
creation.
baby.
It's a day of rest even from creation.
Well, I love the fact that the Hebrew, he rested. You get the idea in English, we need a breather.
Yeah.
Put my feet up a bit, I'm exhausted. Whereas the Hebrew, I understand, is completion, gratification, satisfaction. The creation was good.
Well, so I'm curious about this partly because it's not exactly obvious to me that I know how to rest. I don't know what it means. Well, I mean that. I mean
yeah,
that.
we know, Jordan.
Yeah.
We want
Because
that
I
one
get
out.
engaged in, I just seem to get engaged in some other
But
frenetic
back to
activity.
Dennis's thing,
and-
God created the world not by chance. You could say, and not through us only. That old cartoon, who will take care of the world after I've gone?
That's a good point.
We all think it all depends on me more than it really does. And Sabbath is saying, no, the Lord created it. I only
So
have a
you
small
said set
part.
apartness, but you also said something like
it doesn't depend on
reflective
you.
gratitude.
Jordan, doesn't depend on you, doesn't depend on me. And that's part of the humility that Stephen introduced earlier.
The problem is when they capture you.
The subordination.
Right, and so it's not about like trying to figure out if I'm sinning or not sinning. Like if I go to confession, I ask forgiveness for all the sins I've done, voluntary and involuntary. It's like I'm sinning all the time. If you want to know, like every all day long I'm sinning. But
That's
idea
why you're so much fun.
that's what's so much fun.
So in the ancient world, the parts I know about, and I don't know much about Hammurabi, I'd be astonished if Hammurabi said, it's because I say this, that this is the case, right? Because that, obviously, if a claim that this is so will run up against the reality of it, and it'll either reinforce that reality or it will be subject to refutation by reality. And see, I think all of this, these beautiful things in the Ten Commandments, see, here am I talking for Dennis now, right? Because he lives this life and knows it very well. But as I say, most of my teachers are Jews. These are like, in this text, like the detailed commands that seem boring to everybody. And what Leon Kass says about this, another Jewish teacher of mine, whose book, by the way, what's the name of it? Founding God's Nation. It's just a wonderful book. Have you read that book, Dennis?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you like it?
I've had him on, and look, he's terrific. Do we agree on everything? We're two Jews.
Yeah. Churchill said, wherever there are 3 Jews, there are 2 prime ministers and 1 leader of the opposition.
Oh, that's very funny. I never heard that one.
But the point is, these poor people are being marked out for a demonstration of God's providence. And it's hard duty. And they have to demonstrate visibly in public so we can see, right? And then when they fall short, we can see that too. And there are punishments for that. It's,
No,
the worst thing that can befall a people is to get chosen.
Well, we could also point out too is that people have a
There's no life. You can't.
there's no
Everything else is
community if you
subordinate.
eat each other.
Well, exactly. And so the other ones are going to be further elaborations of what life can be if you have it. But why is the next one, thou shalt not commit adultery? I mean, and just to ask the simple question, why does that matter?
Well, you might say, if you're a biologist, you'd say, well, survival and reproduction. I mean, those are the 2 fundamental, what would you say, necessities of propagating life.
But you can reproduce
So,
perfectly well through adultery.
not if you get killed for doing it. Or
Or
if
it
children
introduces-
get killed.
it
Not if you're married.
Yeah.
By the way, you'll find this fascinating. The 4 prohibitions, murder, adultery, stealing, and false witness. In certain circumstances, they are all capital offenses. And that's the reason they're in the 10 Commandments. So let me very quickly explain. Murder is obvious, life for a life, and only if it's premeditated. Adultery, which needs 2 witnesses, it never happened in reality that we know of, but nevertheless it is a capital offense under certain circumstances. Stealing, if kidnapping is. Stealing property is not a capital offense. That's part of the way they know that it actually meant stealing a life. And the 4th one is one I love. In the Torah itself, this is not later, what if you bear false witness, you are given the punishment that would have been meted out had you been believed. So that if I testify that you committed murder and I perjured myself, I am executed. I wish we had that law today, that you are given the punishment for perjury that would have been meted out had we believed you.
Well, part of what's
clean up the social media.
Well,
rather
part of what's
fast.
pathologized social media.
Oh, forgive me.
Go ahead, Dennis.
I just want to, this is way back, a good 10 minutes ago, you mentioned something, and I just have to state, I do believe in the divinity of the 5 books of the Torah, and divinity and permanence of a law are not identical. It could be a divinely given law, and yet I just quickly want to give one example that is not in Exodus, which strikes most readers as bizarre, and I think it is brilliant. If a man suspects his wife of adultery, he brings him to the priest, who gives her a potion, and if her belly swells, she's guilty. And if it doesn't swell, she's innocent, and they go back to one another. His suspicions are assuaged, and hopefully they will reconcile and have a good marriage. It is obviously, we don't do this today. They stopped doing this by the time of Jesus.
Lost the formula for that potion.
Right. We don't know. What is clear to me is this was God's way of getting husbands not to be suspicious of their wives. It was a way to keep the couple together. I don't believe any woman's belly ever blew up when this potion was given, but it was a genius way. Remember, this is late Bronze Age. What is divine? Keeping the couple together, assuaging the husband's suspicions, keeping his dignity because now she's shown to be innocent, and the fact that God wants couples to stay together. Why is that not divine?
I'll tell you a story that just popped into my mind. A woman told me this story when I was in Europe. She was in a city in the Middle East, a naive American tourist, and she was walking back to her encampment, and a man stopped and offered her a ride to the encampment, and foolishly she got in the car, and he took her out in the desert, and he told her that he had been terribly abused as a child and that he was going to rape her. And he took her into the desert and was preparing to do so, stripped her and laid her on the ground. And when he climbed on top of her, she took him in her arms and told him that she loved him. And he broke down and cried and stopped. And so that's a good example. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Because she got under him. In the psychological sense, right? She managed even in that moment of extremity to look past his voluntary adoption of malevolence and evil, right? And to grab him by the heart and to pull him out of that abyss. And so
it wouldn't have worked with Hitler's or Stalin's torturers.
Hey,
it's critically that it's a great story. I almost cry listening to it. I've never heard it.
It's an amazing story.
But I'm not sure there's much to be extrapolated in the nature of human evil.
Well, it's always an open question, Dennis, because I think it depends to some degree on the canniness of the interlocutor. You know, I would say that if you're going to entice someone malevolent back onto the path of proper being, you have to be as canny in your good as they are in their evil. That's an echo of the notion that you should be as wise as a serpent, right? As harmless as a dove and as wise as a serpent. And I don't know what the limit to that is, because I've seen people in extreme situations walk the path so precisely that they could entice even someone hell-bent on malevolence out of that, that insistence. I mean, I take your point. This is no simple matter, and it's nothing for the naive to attempt. But it's always an open question. You know, even when someone comes after you, how much of the outcome is in your control? And the answer is, to some degree, that's proportionate to the depth of your wisdom. So,
with the caveat that if you run across Adolf Hitler, it's probably a good idea to shoot him.
Well,
one little additional thought. I have spoken on campuses by sheer coincidence on some occasions, not most, but on some. It was Sex Week, which virtually every American campus has. I assume Canadian campuses have as well. And the campus is sort of drenched in sexual discussions, exhibitions, etc. And
I'm naive. I never heard of Sex Week.
Well, you're at Hillsdale.
you're at Hillsdale, yeah. There's no sex at
Sex
Hillsdale.
Week, yeah. But if Hillsdale has Sex Week, invite me.
We agree with the authoritative and where it comes from, but if you say tyrannical, you undermine.
I agree with you totally. I only used it
But
because Jordan did, and you meant to.
Sure,
yes.
make it my fault.
Yeah, no.
One answer to
that was precious.
You're right, the medieval rabbis, I've read that too, but the opposition points out that the people buy into it in Exodus before they hear the details.
We will do and we will observe, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to?
All the Lord says we will do.
And then they rebelled the rest of the Bible.
There's actually two interpretations, right? So in the traditional Jewish commentaries, one interpretation is that they drank, everything's fine. And then the other one is they committed a major sin. Because as we will see, pretty much everybody who participates in this entire process ends up dying, except for Joshua and Moses at the very end, right? So actually, Nadav and Avihu end up approaching God later on in the Bible, and they do so in an unapproved way because they think that they're closer to God than they actually are, and God ends up killing them with a foreign fire, right? That ends up happening in the book of Leviticus. So one of the reads actually in this section that I think makes some sense is that what's happening here, and it leads up to the golden calf, is that the people are as close to God as they've ever been, and they start thinking that they know more about God than they actually know about God. And so they go up onto the mountain. They're supposed to be left behind gradually. Instead, they sit there, they have a big meal, and they have this vision of God in which they see God resting on the sapphire. Now, Jonathan, as you were saying, the sapphire tends to reflect light back up, correct? Right, so, but they think that they're seeing God. What they're actually seeing is not God, right? There's a barrier between them and God. And so they're not willing to acknowledge that barrier. And so this is going to set the stage for what's to happen next, which is they think, okay, well, Moses is gone, right? Moses disappeared, he's up the mountain, as we'll find out, and we can handle this, right? And God specifically says that they should pretty much stick around at the base of the mountain. They don't stick around at the base of the mountain. They go down back into the people, and the sin of the golden calf
So the lesson
happens.
is Jews don't give Jews the benefit of the doubt.
So, I mean, if you do during the course of the Bible, you're going to end up in the wrong place pretty much every time.
So let me offer a thought that has been central to my understanding of life. Everything is holy in this. The curtains are holy, the priests are holy, the sacrifices are holy. Everything is holy until you get to the Holy of Holies. And what's in the Holy of Holies? The Ten Commandments. So my read is the holy protects the ethical. Our society has completely lost the concept of the holy, and as a result, we have lost ethics.
It's a source of the ethical, you could say.
Oh, I don't say that.
Okay.
I'm okay with it, but I'm saying it very precisely as it protects it. When and I always
You
like
mean
to
the
give
outside structure?
No. I'll give you a perfect what I think is a perfect example. You may not agree. I remember being stunned when people started cursing publicly. Having come from a yeshiva religious background, Ben would have the very similar response, and maybe even someone from a strongly Christian background. That we understood people say expletives, etc., but that it became normative in society. To me, that was Jane Q. Wilson's broken windows. To me, the holy is the window that's broken. When you break the holy, you don't immediately break the ethical. Secular people think we don't need holy stuff. That's nonsense. We just need ethics. But it's not true. That's why I say it protects the ethical. Holy, 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 10 commandments.
You know, I could tell you something interesting about curse words that bears on that. So there's a neurological condition, Tourette syndrome, that compels people to swear, or it actually disinhibits swearing. And you might think, how in the world can you have a neurological condition that makes you swear? Well, swear words are 4-letter words. They're guttural utterances. You have a different circuit that swears. It's almost the purest combination of unmediated emotion with language. And when you swear, you're actually using the circuit that animals use to signal the presence of predators. So if a jaguar if a monkey sees a jaguar and it has a jaguar utterance, it's really a curse, and it alerts all the other monkeys to the fact that the jaguar's there, and it has an implication for action. And what happens in Tourette's is the structure that would integrate or inhibit that more primordial linguistic system is not functioning. And so what it means is that as the curse words re-enter the lexicon, it's the collapse of the integration structure that keeps those animal utterances under control. That's literally what's happening.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'd
And
like
in
to
the jungle,
offer
it's
Another reason for the jaguar to eat the monkey.
What's that?
That's another reason for the jaguar to eat the monkey.
Because he's being cursed. Yes, absolutely.
I want to give another example.
They have a different swear word for eagles than for
In addition to
jaguars.
cursing, I'll give you another, because people need to hear examples, because they don't understand. The secular society has no notion of the holy.
Are these examples of curse words, Dennis?
No, I'm going to another one. San Francisco City Council had a debate a few years ago on whether or not to keep laws against public nudity.
Right.
And by one vote, they voted to keep it, and their rationale was a completely secular one, and that was health. That naked people sitting on a bench, it wouldn't be healthy, and we can't rely on them to all sit on a towel. And so on my show, I said, there is only one reason to ban public nudity, and that is that the human being is not an animal. Animals are naked, humans are clothed. That's a religious concept. There is no secular argument against public nudity. Call me up with a secular argument against public nudity. By the way, then as you know, all the left-wing sites, Prager says
in favor of public nudity.
Close, yes. Well, Prager says there are no secular arguments against public nudity. I'm for public nudity, exactly. But it's so important for people to understand. And even my listeners, many of whom have a religious background, it was news to them. Oh, there really is only a religious holy argument against public nudity.
Well,
there is no
there's
secular
an aesthetic
argument.
one, too.
Here's the thing.
Well, okay, fair enough. In some cases.
One of the arguments that I read that was quite compelling from the gay community itself against the idea of gay marriage was that if you move the fringe to the center, all the utility of the fringe disappears. And there's special utility in the fringe, but it is utility of exceptionality. It's not utility of inclusiveness. And the other problem, too, is if you move the fringe to the center, you're faced with the problem that turns out, boys and girls, the fringe has fringes. And so you think you've got a fringe to deal with when the center is the center. You wait till the fringe is the center, and then you're going to see Ontario school teachers with 78 quadruple D breasts and gigantic nipples going to shop class.
And not in a good way.
Right? Yeah.
And for Dennis, there's also undergarments, which say made from linen, covering the naked flesh from the hips to the thighs, so the high priest doesn't bear guilt in the holy place and die.
But there's also
the Dennis Prager line of undergarments coming soon.
I got to tell you, I'm very vulnerable at this moment, to be honest. I wrote an
Time for a
essay.
group hug.
That's funny. There are too many Englishmen here. So
Now we come to Exodus 32, and as Ben pointed out earlier, the Israelites have just seen this complete miracle of volcanic descent of God in the most blatant possible manner, and it's barely manifested itself before they decide to do something egregious. And I would say we probably do that in our own life all the time, Ben, because there are miracles unfolding around us all the time that we're too blind to see, so we don't even see them when they're there. And even if we do see them, it doesn't instantiate the kind of wisdom that instantly makes us into saints. And so I think this is really reflective of what people are like. And the atheist scientists, they say, well, just show me some proof. And the right response to that is you'd forget about the damn proof in about 15 seconds. And so you think you're way more amenable to proof than you are. So, and Aaron made proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early on the morrow and offered burnt offerings.
It's a feast for God. It's not in Aaron's defense. It's not a feast to the calf.
Because it's the
a
name
feast
of God.
To
He's
Yahweh.
not saying, he's not saying.
Okay.
It's a delaying tactic.
Yes, there are a lot of delaying tactics. Get your wives to give all their earrings over is perceived by the rabbis, right, as a delaying
It's
tactic.
not an easy conversation.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Hey, honey, I'll take that earring for a calf. What are you, nuts?
And I said to them, whosoever hath any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me. Then I cast it into the fire, and there came out this calf.
Right, like magical, right? Just came right out, right?
Hilarious. I never noticed that.
Yeah,
What
that's
kids
pretty
say.
funny.
It spilled. No kid has ever said, I spilt the juice.
Then that's very important, right? Because I don't know, of course, I don't know that I don't have Hebrew, so I don't know what the verb form is. But it's so often the case if you're trying not to take responsibility, use the passive voice. Just saying, what happened. Or,
Right.
It is a passive voice.
It happened of its own accord.
Yeah.
A friend
sorry about what happened
A friend of
earlier,
mine
exactly.
had a couple where the husband was caught out in an affair, and he said, it just happened. And the wife said, who happened it?
Right. No, so that's very funny. It is reminiscent of the story of Adam and Eve. It's this ironic humor on the part of the perpetrator victim.
How powerful is your God and how powerful is your covenant if 5 minutes after you got it, you guys are engaging in an orgy at the foot of the mountain in front of a golden statue?
Right. Well, and that nakedness
It
is
does
a
sound pretty
revelation.
damning when you put it that way.
It is a revelation of vulnerability.
Today there's shame if a college girl says, frankly, I'd rather get married than have a great career. That's shame.
And so what do we make
So
of
do we want to talk about the massacre? 'Cause
Yes,
nobody's
definitely.
talking about the
Yes, I was
massacre.
just going to point that out.
Let's just skip
No,
over the
let's
massacre.
not. Let's
and move
not.
on to the rest.
So
You told me to lead this people forth, but you're not telling me who I'm going with, right? You said there's going to be an angel who comes with us or a messenger who comes with us, but you didn't say it's you.
Right.
So I need your commitment. You're going to come with us.
It's
and God's like, okay. And then,
like, do I know this is the real
but that
thing?
last ask is such an unbelievable ask, right? Because he's not just saying, I want you to fulfill the original covenant, right? The original covenant is, you're going to do all these things personally for us, right? You're going to take us forth to the land, you personally, not an angel, right? It's going to be you. You're going to travel with us. You're going to be with us. And God says, okay, you got it. And then he says, but I want more than that. I want to know you. I want to know you at the deepest level. And God answers him, and he doesn't just say no, right? He actually says, I'll show you as much as you can take, basically. Right, which is what the next part is, right? The next several verses are just that. So I think maybe you should read the next few verses and finish off the.
Go ahead, Oz.
No, the way I see it is he's negotiated and got to this point. They're back on track. But he knows, as you said, there's going to be tough days ahead. The people are still the people. So I think this is the most audacious prayer in the Bible. He is praying to know everything of the Lord that a human being can know and not die.
Right, which is also a daring prayer.
And
it's sort of like, take me to my limits.
He doesn't see the Lord face to face. And at the end, the tribute, he speaks to the Lord face to face, but he doesn't see him.
By the way, whenever no is used, K-N-O-W, with regard to another person, it means sexual congress. So it's very interesting, and I'm not in any way implying that there's a sexual element here.
We
of course
appreciate
not.
that. We appreciate that.
Yeah, no. For the record, I know you all know that, but maybe
For media
somebody.
matters.
Well, it also-
Friends of media
Well,
matters.
Yeah, that's right.
But no in that sense also means to enter into creative union with. That's why there's the sexual connotation.
Fair enough.
Right, and
But
that part
it's
is
powerful. It's very powerful that he
Right,
uses that word.
right,
That's all I
right,
wanted to
right.
know.
The highest level of intimacy that you can achieve with another
Is
being.
to know.
What that really suggests is that what God wants is for us to, and this goes back to Genesis, he wants us to get stronger, and that means struggling with him. He doesn't want religion to be easy. I mean, I think that the thing that so many people who are secular think about religious people is that religious people don't think about these questions at all. Right? They act as though the question of theodicy, for example, has never come up in all of human history, right? No, why do bad things happen to good
I'd
people?
like to offer you a proof that you'll find fascinating. I was invited to debate the head of the largest atheist organization in the U.S. in Minneapolis about 15 years ago. By the way, of course, when did they schedule it? Easter Sunday. It was so obvious why they did that. But in any event, I was very impressed that they invited me.
The good news is they knew you were Jewish, so it didn't matter to you. So it was all fine.
Right. I'll tell you something I did afterwards. My wife and I did. You'll find very fascinating. But anyway, so we had this debate, and I give them total credit for inviting me. They couldn't have been kinder. Unlike some religious organizations, they paid me that day. I just want to make that clear. Credit goes where it is due. And I looked at the audience at one point, about 400 atheists, and I said, would you raise your hand if you ever doubt your atheism? For example, if you've seen your child born, or any child born, or anything like, or heard a Beethoven symphony, do you ever doubt your atheism? Not one hand went up. And then I said, you think, this is based on what you were just saying, you think we religious people don't question ourselves. You don't question yourself, because every religious person I have ever spoken to, and that's thousands upon thousands, has acknowledged that they doubt their faith at times and they struggle with it. We struggle, you don't. It was a really a clarifying moment.
It's legitimately embedded in the text, right? I mean, in Genesis, the name Yisrael literally means
struggle with God.
Right, That's what it means, right? I mean, and the whole narrative of Jacob wrestling with the angel is essentially Jacob wrestling with the problem of why do bad things happen to good people and how do I deal with that? And so,
how do I orient myself to the good despite the fact that bad things happen to good people?
Exactly.
Right?
And
Why would I maintain faith under those conditions?
When people act as though religion is supposed to resolve your struggle, no, religion is supposed to make you struggle. The religious way is the hard way. It's the only satisfying way, in my view. But it is a much harder way, no question. I mean, the easiest thing to say is there's no meaning to anything, so I'm not even going to bother thinking about this ever.
By the way, in verse 1, sorry, Stephen, verse 1. So we raised the question previously, was Moses wrong in shattering the tablets? And we didn't come to a conclusive answer, and there may not be. But I do think that verse 1 of this chapter suggests that God is annoyed with him for having done so. And I have two pieces of evidence. The Lord said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets. I carved the first.
That's right.
You broke them. Now you carve them. I am not carving a second pair. I have a second proof. The words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered.
There you go.
Why does he add which you shattered? Just said the words that I carved on the first tablets. So I think it's fairly dispositive. God is annoyed with him.
There's an
for
interesting
having done so.
and obscure tradition that I heard, and I actually don't know where it comes from, but I thought it was illuminating. It was this notion that the first tablets were made out of precious stones, that they were made out of some sapphire or something like that, and that the second tablets were made out of common stone, like granite or some kind of building stone.
More base.
Yeah, and that then in some ways, just like this idea of the sea of crystal, or the sea of precious stones, that the first law was very reflective and was like a jewel, but in some ways was not, let's say, not enough not made in a way that you can build out of, or you can't build out of precious stones.
Be hard to shatter them if they're made out of precious stone.
I think there's also very
Maybe diamonds.
So 2 quick observations. The first is that Jordan's cup has had such a starring role. In this, I feel like the cup's cupness has been contemplated like
So many
mortality.
times.
Yeah, I know. I
From
don't know
a
what it
business
is about
perspective, we're
cups.
going to have to auction it off.
That's right.
It's the holy grail, this thing.
But
The Holy Grail.
30, okay, yes. 35:3. You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. I just want you to know this is why I don't smoke my cigars on the Sabbath, because of the banning of making a fire. It is that is one of my great sacrifices. And this, you're big.
We all appreciate
no,
that.
I want you to appreciate it. If you don't love cigars, you really don't appreciate it. It's his empathy without real empathy, and I can handle it.
You're
But
also limiting your carbon dioxide output and your particulate production. So we appreciate that too.
Dennis is really big on Juuls, though, on like the smoking of the Juul cigarettes, which are smokeless.
That's right. No, that's a separate. That truly is a separate. But in all seriousness, that is why I don't smoke my cigars on for those 24 hours.
You smoke them every other day?
Yeah, every other day. Absolutely. It's a mitzvah
Religiously.
every other day. Yes. It is a merit. It is to my merit that I do. I just want you to know, since you've asked, so the oldest World War II vet died just a couple of years ago, and I think 106, a black veteran in Texas. He was asked at 105, what is the secret to your longevity? Dallas Morning News, you can look it up. And he said, God and cigars. And I thought, I'm here for a long time. That really was very encouraging to me. I just do want to say, though, that this is very powerful. You are, and Ben, you'll find this of interest because of our mutual Orthodox background. There was no ban on lighting a fire on any other holy day. The rabbis extrapolated, but it is not in the Torah. And I worked very hard on this in my commentary. And I am convinced that the reason for this very archaic sounding law is because outside of the creation of a human being through intercourse, there is no ex nihilo creation that humans can engage in like making a fire. There is no fire, and then there is fire. Water becomes ice, trees become a house, everything becomes something. Fire is from nothing. We don't light a fire, I am convinced, on the Sabbath, because we are imitating God, who stopped creating on the Sabbath, and this is our way of imitating God by not creating on the Sabbath, not lighting a fire. I think there's a great overriding lesson, at least as I've studied numbers all of my life. First of all, on numbers, when people ask, what does it refer to, numbers? I go, numbers of complaints. So that helps that part.
This is a little biological interlude. I was talking to Temple Grandin, who knows more about herd animals than anyone else in the world. You know that cows have natural leaders, and that cowboys who know their herds, they move the leader and all the cows follow. And then, you know, if you take your cows on a long trip, imagine you numbered them in sequence when they pass through a chute, and they just do that of their own accord. Then you take them like on a 3-month trek and you run them through the chute again, they'll run through the chute in the same order. So there's a natural hierarchy of leadership, and that the cows who are leaders have, now I don't remember what the set of distinct physiological characteristics are, but they have a set of distinct physiological characteristics. And all the cows know who the leader is.
Usually.
Yeah, charisma, that's right. Their face shines. Yeah. And Moses gat him into the camp, he and the elders of Israel. And there went forth a wind from the Lord and brought quails from the sea and let them fall by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, and as it were 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. It's like Quail City, man. Yeah.
By the way, on just, you mentioned, what was it, misremembering the past?
Yeah.
What was the term you used?
That's
or
essentially
misrepresenting
it.
the past?
Misrepresenting the past.
So I'll just tell you a great Soviet, the greatest humor I've ever known is Soviet dissident humor. Because, and I spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union, and so this is my favorite humor. So here was a great line in the Soviet Union, and it was this: in the Soviet Union, The future is known. It's the past which is always changing.
Yeah, right.
For the Christians here, my Christian friends frequently note the sin of pride. That is, it's a big sin in Christendom, if I'm not mistaken. So does this verse in any way bug you, that he was the humblest man on the face of the earth?
You mean because it...
Does that suggest, I mean, how many people, if you heard someone say to you, I am the humblest man on earth.
Well, it's not. He's not. Well, I guess you're right.
Well,
he's
what do you
supposedly
mean
writing the
Moses is not
text.
saying
That's
that?
called a
These
humble
are-
brag.
These are the
because he's
5
supposedly
books of
the
Moses.
author.
Right.
That's why.
No.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
We're assuming
and
assuming
Jew.
it's God's judgment.
Okay, but the traditional...
Is that the way?
I know. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
It is a very interesting way to think
St.
about
Paul
it.
editorial comment.
Because the traditional Jew and Christian believe that God dictated this, as it were, to Moses. So when Moses hears, let's say that happened. So Moses hears, I want you to write that you're the humblest man on the face of the earth. And so does Moses go, well, tell you the truth, I feel a little awkward writing that line. I mean, isn't that a fair question?
It's a comical question.
It's a comical
It's a comical question. I'm going to move past the comedy into the spies of Canaan. And Ben, oh yes, Ben, thank you for coming. We're going to lose Mr. Shapiro tomorrow, which is a great loss, but we've been very pleased to have him here. And
No, the Sabbath dictates. So.
Precisely. He's going to abide by the dictates of the covenant, unlike the rest of us heathens. And
So here's a great story that illustrates the power of tzitzit, for the fringes. And it's amazing that it's even in the Talmud, because you would think of it as rather turgid or very scholarly and pious. So it has to do with a young man who was a Torah student, and apparently he went one day to another town to visit a prostitute. And as he was in front of her, he began undressing. And the Talmud says, as he got to his fringes, the tzitzit, they flew up and smacked him in the face. At that point, he remembered why he is wearing the fringes, and he put his clothing back on. And the prostitute said to him, do I not find favor in thine eyes? It was a very cultivated prostitute. and he said, no, you do very much, but I am reminded by the fringes how I should act. She was so impressed, the Talmud says, she converted to Judaism, and they lived happily ever after. Is that a great story?
all right.
What book do you read? Where do you put your attention?
Well, when
Where
I
do you want
pose
to, what
this-
restaurant do you want to go to?
They have an answer. It's interesting. So I would say to them, so let me ask you something. So Superman comics are on the same level as Dostoevsky, and this is decades ago. Caller after caller would tell me on my radio show, yes, I prefer Superman. Dennis.
Subjectively
you
defined.
prefer Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
There's no better or worse.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's often motivated by two things. It's motivated by an unbelievable lack of differentiated taste. And so that's a sin in and of itself. I think a sin against beauty. And it's also motivated by a desire to dispense with responsibility, because you might say, well, everything's equal because I believe in the brotherhood of man. It's like, no, everything's equal because you don't want to do the bloody work necessary to move yourself up a valid hierarchy.
Quick observations. One, Moses was slightly undone by wearing a T-shirt that said "meekest man on earth" all the time, so it was somewhat problematic.
To bounce off what Douglas said about the fratricidal, Metternich said very famously at the time of the French Revolution that when he saw what the French brothers did to brothers, if he had a cousin, he said, if he had a brother, he said he would call him cousin.
Right.
So you say narcissism, right? So what do you do when that is a condition that's cultivated by the culture and people are young and they're occupying that space?
Fall into the pit and the earth slams shut.
I have a question, because there's a terrifying notion that's baked into this, and I'm curious what your take on it is from the interpretation you've given, which is if Moses is the meekest man on earth, and even he has this sin of pride, then
No, it wasn't a sin of pride.
Well,
it was okay, go ahead.
Well, okay, so let's say it's a sin of overstepping his boundaries and claiming glory for himself rather than taking it from God.
Even though that's not what he meant. They just said, this is right after Korach's rebellion. They just said, you're no better than anybody else. So he says, oh, really? Watch, we'll get water out of this rock. He didn't mean to say we, not God. Rather, we, not you. But it didn't matter. It came out as we, not God.
But you really think Moses got gypped in this whole thing? Like Moses really?
But that's not just a slip of the tongue.
That's right. You're right. Doesn't deserve. Is that what you said?
Yeah. You think Moses doesn't deserve what God gives?
Oh no, he doesn't deserve it. But God was right because had he gotten away with that and gotten them into Israel, they would have worshipped him. That's why he's buried where no man can find him, so that he will never be worshipped.
He really is pro-Moses.
That's for sure.
Right. And pro-God, by the way. I just want to make that clear.
Dennis, to be clear, though, so you're saying it literally was a slip of the tongue?
Yes. But an understandable one in light of what they had just said. Oh, you're no better than, oh, really? No better? Watch, we'll get water out.
So there's nothing about his claim, because Jonathan's interpretation is a little bit that he's bringing the glory to himself, right?
And he is, but it wasn't the, yes, he
but
is,
you say
but
he
not,
didn't mean to.
not
So
your
vis-a-vis
point is,
God, vis-a-vis them.
Yeah, but
your point is even if he does it inadvertently,
That's correct.
it's so egregious an error that he doesn't get to be.
Right, so here's Prager's theory on life. God does not punish us in this life for bad things. He punishes us for foolish things.
Oh.
The bad is punished in the next world. The foolish is punished in this world.
If you take the biblical
That's
narrative,
the way life works for most of us. The Hitlers of the world don't get punished in this world. But we, at this table, we get punished for foolish things because we're not an evil group. I mean, that's fair to say.
So far.
But
in another part of the Mediterranean world, in the ancient Mediterranean world, the great theatre of Epidaurus is right next to the site of Asclepius. Now, isn't there something about the healing power of a imaginative tradition that is engaging with the human condition and with human suffering? And we've seen a great deal of suffering, a great deal of conflict, a great deal of failure in this text. As Greg was saying, the failures of the Israelites are egregious. And yet, what comes out of this text but this affirmation, this celebration of life?
At Athens, the great theater where the tragedies were held is just outside the temple, just down the mountain. And so the Athenians had this temple that was associated with this kind of pristine rationality, but right allied with that was the idea that the divine revelation was somehow deeply allied with the dramatic presentation of a sequence of tragedies. And so
I think originally it was in fact the amphitheater itself was a site of worship. It was where the goat was sacrificed to Dionysus in the annual Dionysia. I think tragedy means, I think it means goat song, doesn't it?
Goat song, yep.
So it emerges out of this religious ritual, in effect.
It's also a good heavy metal band name. Yeah. Goat song.
All right.